Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to talk through what is a cloud operating model and how is that different in the cloud compared to how you operate on premises. And then we'll talk through how we see some of the best practices when implementing a cloud operating model, introduce you to Microsoft's cloud adoption framework and some of the Agile Landing Zone principles, although we'll be talking about those in greater detail in a subsequent webinar. And some of the do's and don'ts, what you should be thinking about when you migrate to Azure to make yourself successful. Okay, we're going to open up the Q&A now. So Beth will be monitoring the Q&A chat. Do you want to say hello, Beth?
Yeah, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat throughout the webinar, and Richard will come back to them at the end.
Yeah, and if there's anything which is pertinent at that point in time, then Beth will just interrupt me and I'll cover that at that point. Okay, so yeah, feel free to make use of that. All right, just so you know as well, we're going to be PDFing the slides at the end of this as well, so we can distribute those to everybody who's attending as well. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so what is a cloud operating model? So got some of the key things which fall into a cloud operating for us. One of those is really just a set of guidelines and principles for how you operate within the cloud. So how do you migrate new workloads? How do you deploy those solutions? How do you manage change? How do you support and govern the whole environment? So it does then involve people working slightly differently. So we're going to talk a little bit about organization of people and how that differs from how you work on prem, and some of the key constructs we think are sensible to help move through, with the focus on management, governance and security. And that falls into skilling as well, so addressing the skills gap and how people take on slightly different roles and responsibilities. We'll also cover some of the key support functions needed and how we split up the platform itself, the split responsibility with Microsoft, usually a partner if you're taking a managed service as well, and your own responsibilities, and how we work with core shared services and individual workloads. A lot of that will be covered in more detail when we talk through Agile Landing Zone in a subsequent session, but it's worth understanding some of the key aspects to that. We'll also talk about governance and compliance. One of the great reasons for taking Azure in the first place is it makes it easier to get some level of governance and show your compliancy with key standards which are out there. And those standards also apply to cloud security. So some of the considerations there, and again, how it differs from on-premise. So some of the key things we'll be looking at is business strategy alignment. One of the benefits of working in the cloud is because of the flexibility in how you design things, it's easier sometimes to get some stronger and closer alignment with the business strategy. So we'll be looking at some of the key motivations we'll look for migrating to the cloud. And part of that is how you manage cloud commercials. So it's very different working with something which is pay as you go, where you can do reserved instances, where you have scalable resources, how you can do cost allocation and show back. Some considerations there, particularly when people no longer have to wait for a purchase order and procurement, they can deploy something and it's going to start incurring costs. So how do you get control over that, quotas and alerts and the other things that we have? Architectural concepts shift as well, greater focus on moving and migrating to different applications, normally with IaaS at first when people are doing migrations, but very quickly they start replatforming, start using different services such as containers or PaaS and serverless as they start changing how the applications get deployed, or redeploying their existing applications to take advantage of the different services within the cloud. And that really then lends itself to the question of how you manage both the innovation and the control over the platform and the cost of the platform, just to make sure those guardrails are in place, the guidelines are being followed, but you're not restricting the innovation and that velocity of change that cloud really allows you to make. So that then falls into some of the organization constructs we'll have, and also then how you iterate over those to start with something nice and small and simple and then grow it as you need to. So good news is that a lot of work has been put into this to make it work effectively for those customers who've migrated into the cloud already. So the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure has been in place now for a few years and has been constantly iterated over itself and refined as we've gone through and as new services have been added into Azure in the first place. And it's really taken the original cloud operating model we had on Azure and upgraded that with a lot of the best practices and learnings we've had from working with different customers, from working with the managed services with Microsoft, with working with partners, and putting all that information together to get a set of guidance which works for different size organizations and what they're aspiring to do within the cloud. And a lot of it focuses on what wraps around a successful migration adoption of the platform, outside of the more simple data center migration aspects. So if you look at the top right here, you've got plan, ready, and adopt. That's really just basically looking at the estate, making sure you've got a target platform to migrate to, and then how you then migrate workloads or innovate into that. So that's very similar to a standard migration project that you might see if you're just moving from one colo data center into another colo data center. There's some differences because we're moving into cloud as a target, but essentially that's a lot of the same. What's really the focus here is what do you wrap around it to make it work differently and with that cloud operating model. So getting the strategy and making sure the motivations for moving into the cloud are understood, so you know how to be successful, how you really assess organizationally how you're going to work with that, what roles and responsibilities and constructs you're going to use organizationally, and how that differs from what you have on premise is really important. And that then filters into the steady state we see at the bottom. So making sure you have the functions in place to maintain that level of governance, compliancy, and split the responsibilities within that. Who's looking after management, support, and making sure that things are working effectively on the platform and also securely. So maintaining that security posture and improving it over time as well. Right, so again, more good news is that lots of people have been down this path before, so we understand what's going to make that successful. And I'm going to just pick out a couple of the key things from this around the motivations and the first workload. Okay, so in terms of motivations, there's a whole host of different reasons why people do come into the cloud in the first place. Some of those are really compelling events. So if they've got something like a data center lease, which is finishing up, and now's the time it's going to trigger them to move into the cloud, then that could be something which makes it very sensible. Likewise, we see a large number of organizations going through mergers and acquisitions, and it actually makes it a bit more flexible when you're sort of bridging across multiple organizations and eventually merging those organizations to actually work within the cloud, because you've got that flexibility within it. But also we're seeing much more around compliancy, particularly in public sector, financial services, where they need to prove their level of compliancy, data sovereignty, and making use of the cloud and everything we have in terms of policy and policy initiatives to help prove that level of compliancy. That also falls into some of what we're seeing in terms of the green agenda and making sure that you're moving onto a platform which has got a lower carbon footprint compared to on-premises as well, which the cloud is particularly good for. We also have other migration motivations coming around cost savings, which means that actually care and attention needs to be paid to how you migrate certain workloads and take advantage of the different SKUs and scalabilities and controls you have within the cloud. But there's also the ability to then change how you operate. And this is really a big area. So that third bullet down the middle, optimization of internal operations, really comes into, again, some of the cloud operating model aspects we're talking about. So understanding what Microsoft is going to do for you on the platform in terms of split responsibility there, what they expect you or you and a partner to do to then maintain the workloads on top of those and use all the controls which are available to you and all the services where you can take advantage of, is key to making that work successfully. And in doing so, you need to prepare for those new technical capabilities, get people trained up to take advantage of those services, excuse me, and also understand how they can use new services on the platform, which maybe they once have used on premises. There's also the ability to then really innovate on the platform. That could be something as simple as just scaling up and down to take advantage of the platform to meet market demands, moving out into different geographies if you want to do something which is geographically scaled to meet your customers' requirements. But it also comes down to customer experiences. So one of the key things we're seeing this year is a lot of interest in all the OpenAI and generative AI experiences which can come through. Some of those are just pure SaaS experiences. So if you're adding Copilot, something like Microsoft, or into Security Copilot, GitHub Copilot, that's available to you. But really, there's a lot of opportunity to really customize and ground the Copilots in the business data and add those into what you do for your internal customers and external customers as well. So we're seeing a lot of opportunity there to really do that, and really the best place to do that is going to be in the cloud. So therefore, migrating your workloads into the cloud to take advantage of those services is really important. Okay, so it gives the opportunity to really disrupt the market, look at new products, look at new services, look at what you can do to really drive that innovation through and take advantage. Okay, so really what comes out of that is not just a migration. It's not just saying, okay, once we've moved workloads, then we're done and dusted here. It's really how we're going to operate around those. And if you understand the business motivations in the first place, then you understand how you can be successful with it. So looking at that success criteria is really important. The one thing I didn't touch on was that first workload. So this is something we see as being really important. It's very easy to pick a workload which is too trivial, in which case if you migrate it and move it, not enough people are going to care about that. So you want to pick something which is really important. Also, you don't want to pick something which is overly complicated, because one of the key things with migrating to the cloud is you want to get some momentum going and you want it to snowball and show that success early. So if you want to do that, you want to pick an important workload, but one that's not going to be too complex to migrate, because you don't want to be waiting months or years to migrate that over. So start small, get the first workload over, make sure it's impactful, and then start migrating from there. Okay, so as part of that, you want to rationalize your digital estate. So a lot of you be familiar with the 5 R's, maybe there's 6 or 7 depending on which model you're looking at. But in terms of looking at those, you can retire or you can move on to SaaS, which ones you're just going to rehost and migrate with a lift and shift, or if you're going to re-platform or re-architect something a bit more complex. Understanding what you have on premises, which workloads are going to shift into the cloud, and how you're going to approach that is really important. After that, I'm going to really focus on numbers 2 and 3. So initial organizational alignment, it's best to change it. If you are looking to take your existing organizational structures as is and just operate within the cloud as if it was just another colo data center, then we see that as being one of the pitfalls that a lot of customers do when they're not approaching this from the right angle. So really look at some of the recommendations within the Cloud Adoption Framework. There's a section within documentation on the Microsoft Learn site specifically around some initial organizational structures, and we can help you with those as well. Just to make sure that you've got the right people aligned to the right tasks, right responsibilities, and also a split, particularly on the governance side, between those who define which governance is required and those who implement and report on it. And that comes into the skills readiness plan. So one thing which is definitely true of the cloud is you will never stop learning. There's a continuous learning aspect to this, which is really important. So understanding what their skills gaps are, how you're going to start bridging those and getting people so they have enough knowledge to start moving onto the platform and getting their hands on is really key. And you're not going to get people who are fully trained on everything and then start. It's going to be a continuous learning experience, and you need to set that expectation that people should be able to come forward and say where their own gaps are and where they need to skill up. So really, the ability to learn is much more important here than anything else. Okay, so let's look at one of those examples of the initial organizational alignment. So I'm going to look at the governance side of things. And one of the natural splits is getting that split between speed versus control. So this has been one of the painful points looking back in the past, where some organizations have quickly landed workloads into the cloud. Different teams have moved what they had into the cloud, and they quickly spin up resources, quickly consume cost in doing so. And there's a lack of governance about what they're creating, and the shared resources within there aren't being shared. They're just creating their own for their own application. So we had the Wild West, if you like, of a lot of organizations adopting cloud without any level of governance around it and control. On the flip side, we had others who overreacted to that. So some of the early adopters, when they saw things going out of control, put a lot of control over it and effectively gated access to the system. So we came to a situation where, when they're doing that, rather than taking 3 months to purpose a server on premise because they had to go through the procurement process, they were taking the same amount of time to do so in the cloud because they had to go through so many steps to be approved and go through all the gating processes, which completely removes a lot of the benefits of working within the cloud in the first place. So really, we're looking to get both here. How do you enable the adoption in the first place? How do you provide people with the core shared services they need to be effective? And how do you provide the right guardrails, governance, compliancy, and policies around it to make sure that people can use the platform effectively without straying beyond the boundaries of what you want them to do? So this is really allowing people to move quickly without adding risk into the whole process. So getting that balance right is something that we're going to talk about as we look at the landing zone for this. So landing zone really comes into the ready phase. So we've gone across from the strategy through the plan to the ready part of this at the moment. So when you're setting up your Azure environment, is really making sure that target environment is set up for you to be successful. Not just somewhere for you to migrate virtual machines to, because chances are there's going to be more workloads in play than that, but it's really making sure that you're set up for the security, for the governance, for the networking, for the identity. And some of those parts will be fairly simple in terms of doing the identity, stretching what you probably have already on premise with Active Directory and having that replicate into what's now Microsoft Entra ID or Azure Active Directory for those of you who've been using that name for a period of time. But also it's going to be the networking, so how you connect your on-premises environments with maybe an express route or site-to-site VPN connectivity through MPLS into your Azure virtual networking. So there's a whole host there, but really the focus here is not just around those core shared services, around identity, around management, and around connectivity, but what you're then placing around that to make sure that you have the governance around it. And we'll look at management groups in the subsequent session when we look at the landing zones more closely, but also how you deploy to it, how you operate on it, how you protect the resources which are then deployed onto it from a business continuity and disaster recovery perspective. So this is really gearing up to have this as a production environment rather than somewhere where the developers are just toying with it and landing workloads quickly. You want to get this to it can be accepted into production as fast as possible. Okay. Right. We will be issuing some times for the subsequent session around the Azure landing zone for that. We also have a standard approach for how we then do a migration factory in effect for adopting and migrating onto the platform. So in terms of planning out your workload and then really adopting that as a set of waves is the most natural way to do this. So going for those waves or tranches of work and just basically rotating around. You can see the arrows around this diagram just going around time and time again, depending on how many workloads you're looking to migrate. So getting the platform ready for that, migrating those over, getting them accepted into production, getting everything integrated, unit testing, acceptance testing, end user testing, and then basically repeat and release to make sure it's going underneath the governance and operations management. So you want to make sure that you're migrating successfully, but also you're migrating safely in doing so. And this is something that we at Cloud Direct do as part of our bread and butter. And again, you'll be using different tooling for this. We make a lot of use of the first-party tooling here. So Azure Migrate has a lot of first-party capability around assessment and migration capabilities, but it's also a framework. So you'll see a number of third-party solutions down the bottom, which can be integrated in that for both the assessment part and for the migration aspect. But really, we find that a lot of the first-party functionality for that within Azure Migrate meets most customers' needs. That extends beyond doing the assessment and right sizing the target environment and checking that all the prereqs in place and understanding the relationships between the workloads and looking specifically at the databases. We picked out SQL here as an example. Having a look at your SQL databases on premise. We tend to use Azure Data Studio with the SQL migration extensions, which then feed into things like Azure Database Migration Service under the hood. But again, that enables us to assess those and look at migrating those either to single virtual machines or to always on clusters or into a PaaS database service, depending on what's suitable for you. And then it's really how you then release those. So again, the acceptance testing comes into that, but we also look at Azure Cost Management, Azure Advisor, which then feeds into the well-architected framework, which is another aspect we'll cover in the next session, to make those recommendations around what you have in terms of performance and operations and cost efficiency and other aspects. Resiliency. Azure Monitor for monitoring those services, and Azure Defender for Cloud, which often is integrated into other third-party SIEM system, including Azure Sentinel for us. It then enables you to get a handle on how you do the monitoring, get some automation around the alerting, and get some insight as to what your security stance is and how you can improve that. So it's one of the key things at that point. Okay, as we mentioned, security. So we have a lot of security disciplines which come into this, and there's different ways of looking at this. One of the key shifts compared to on-premise is really the move to access control and zero trust. So with everything being cloud-based, we see identity and the network controls combining to be that key boundary within that. And we also assume breaches doing so. So assuming that at some point one of your systems will be compromised, and really then how they can migrate laterally from that to attack other systems is really important. So we do zero trust to make sure we minimize the blast radius of those, and using identity with some really strong controls with everything that Microsoft Entra ID offers to protect your workloads sensibly. Doesn't mean there's no focus at all on network controls. We have a lot of controls within Azure in terms of what we have with network security groups, Azure Firewall, App Gateway with controls within that for the WAF. A whole host of different controls to make sure that security is taken care of, but really a big focus on identity as part of that. We then look at how we detect and respond and recover from those attacks. And Azure has a great set of platform capabilities from Monitor Defender to Cloud, how you work with the alerting and alert groups within that, but also how it applies a lot of intelligence and a lot of AI to help cut out the noise and really get correlation between different events. And that really feeds into platforms like Microsoft Sentinel, which takes inputs not just from Azure, but from other sources as well, including Microsoft 365 and third-party areas too. We talk about asset protection. We've made a big investment in terms of data and AI with a new practice lead in that area as well. So we're going to be focusing a lot on this forward in how we protect your sensitive data. So extending beyond what we naturally do within Microsoft 365 and Office 365 with the workload sitting there and data sensitivity and labeling and controls over that to what you have sitting within Azure more generally. So adopting a different data posture there. Also, it comes into security governance, where we look at the security posture and look at the recommendations to improve that. So this is part of the proactive service that you can look at from Cloud Direct as well, to really make sure that you're constantly evolving how that looks. And that includes how you then innovate. So if you look at the DevOps aspects of it and make sure security is embedded into those processes when you're doing your build and deployment pipelines, and making sure that the controls are in place to make sure that you're being secure as you go through those processes. And again, some more good news is that there's a lot of IP which has come out from Microsoft, and we pivot around that IP to make sure you're going to be successful. So from working with the Azure Landing Zone Accelerator to then deploy that, that's really key to make sure you get those management group structures with Azure policy initiatives, which are the guardrails in place to help make sure you don't do the wrong things and you're effectively auditing and helping you to do things in the correct way. And that also comes down to some of the key networking controls we talked about earlier as well as the identity side. The other great thing about Azure Policy and the initiatives we use is it helps to automate some of the heavy lifting around what you want to see happening as well. So integration with security, making sure you have the right extensions on virtual machines for Azure Monitor, for example, can be automated so that you just basically provision the virtual machines and then it's automatically going to modify and extend those to make sure the right configuration is done. So again, it's really guardrails, not just to put barriers in the way, but actually to make sure that things are just done naturally and taking advantage of the automation on the platform. And then we can look at how we then implement additional Azure security services, how we upgrade what we do with the web application firewalls within things like Azure Front Door and also Application Gateway, how we make use of the additional functionality you can take advantage of within Azure Defender for Cloud, how you can make use of the additional DDoS protections within the platform if you've got a lot of online web applications that you provide to customers and you want to avoid any attacks on those, plus any additional compliancy requirements you have to meet. So if you've got anything around CIS, Cyber Essentials, ISO 27001, then again, we can help you take advantage of the controls in Azure to help you achieve those compliancy requirements, as well as elevating what you do with functionality like Azure Virtual Network Manager and Azure Firewall Manager to apply security rules, automated routing and policy rules on firewalls across the whole estate. So there's some good basics, and there's a whole host we can do to then extend and take advantage of the additional services depending on how far you want to take it. Right, last couple of slides I want to cover off here really. In terms of management, there's a whole host you can do with management, but we're just going to concentrate on the top part, which is really hitting the inventory of visibility. So making sure that you have that visibility within the great tooling within the graph we have within Azure for the resource graph, plus all the monitoring and capabilities from diagnostic through to host, through to the workloads, through to application insight, container insights for different resources as well. And then that feeds into how we operationally maintain that and comply with that. So again, comes back into Azure Policy, how we operate and maintain these systems, how we support those systems and meet that in a cloud operating model sense. And finally, protect and recover is really making sure that you have protected those workloads according to the criticality of them, according to the RTO and RPOs you need to protect those from, and the scenarios you're looking to protect from. So if you just need to recover systems, if you need to make them highly available depending on different scenarios and what could happen, if you need to be able to go for business continuity at a regional level, then we can help with making sure the right services are used in the right way for that too, before we get into some of the more complex stuff. All right, just going to touch on governance. So governance really makes sure that everything is going to be done in the correct way. The Azure landing zone I talked about earlier creates a lot of automated policies for you, in addition to the ones which are built into the platform in the first place, with initiatives being collections of those to make it even simpler. So applying those can make sure that you've got a lot of resource consistency and management. That could be something as simple as naming conventions, which regions you deploy to, the naming convention you have, the tagging that you have applied to make sure you have those controls over it. We also have security baselines, so standard security baselines plus additional controls for the compliances I talked about earlier, such as ISO 27001. Identity, cost management, helping to accelerate deployments in a safe manner. These are all different aspects of governance which come into what you can get from Azure landing zones, and also what we can then add on in terms of additional configuration or customization of custom policies into that to help meet specific business requirements. Okay, so again, we've pivoted a lot around the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework just because that is that best practice IP come from Microsoft and is very actively maintained. The Azure landing zones also are actively maintained as well, and there's a lot of IP from Microsoft in terms of both Bicep and Terraform repositories, which help that be deployed effectively as well. So whilst it may look initially complex, it's one of the reasons we like to help educate customers as to how it hangs together. It means that we can then deploy those and safely take advantage of that IP and know how to update that over time, know how to customize it on behalf of the customers. So really a lot of content to cram into half an hour here, but hopefully it's given you a feel for how we take advantage of the Cloud Adoption Framework to help customers be successful as they adopt the cloud and how they move into a cloud operating model as part of that. So we've got some next steps here before we touch on some of the Q&A. If you want to talk to us about how you take next steps to migrating into the cloud or innovating within the cloud, then we have some contact details at the back end of the deck as well. We are a organization which is frankly punching above our size. We have got Azure Expert MSP, which is one of the most difficult accreditations to get within Azure. Plus we have a number of different advanced specializations and designations. So we're a highly accredited Microsoft partner, and working with Cloud Adoption Framework, Azure landing zones, migrations, and our managed services to help with that split responsibility we talked about is the core part of our business. But we will also be doing much more around where customers go next in terms of how they modernize their applications, how they take advantage of AI, how they look at the data platforms and really evolve that aspect as well. So expect to see a lot more capability being surfaced from us in the webinars over the next 3 to 6 months. Okay, so if you want to accelerate your journey, we've got some links in here. So you've got the email, the website, and the telephone number if you want to get in contact. We also have some resources, so we can help ease the path a little bit. We take advantage of a number of programs and incentives within Microsoft and pass those on to you. So if you want to get involved in assessment, deployment of different types, then we can have a look and see what you could possibly qualify for, and again, help you get past some of those financial hurdles if they're blocking you from adopting the cloud in the first place. So that's something that's been very successful for us in the past. Right, there's not left a great deal of time for any Q&A, but Beth, is there anything that's come through in the Q&A chat which you want me to cover off now?
Nope, not at the moment. So no questions.
Okay. Well, that's great because it's actually 10:30 now, so I've actually used up all the time anyway. So just want to thank you very much for your attention. Please look out for some more communication around the deck we've used today. So Beth will be sending that out to those of you who've attended. And likewise, we'll be communicating about subsequent webinars in the future. Definitely recommend, if you've been interested in this one, make sure you come to the one about Azure Landing Zone and some of the key concepts and design areas within that, just to make sure you've got a deeper understanding of how that hangs together. But once again, thank you.